Hey everyone, this is Hafizullah Masoudi and you're watching From Code with Hafiz. I welcome you to the 13th video of this series where we will discuss CSS Combinators, CSS Studio Class and CSS Studio Elements. So first of all, we have the CSS Combinators. Now a combinator is something that explains the relationship between the selectors. So a selector can contain more than one simple selector, and between the simple selectors we can include a combinator. Now there are four different types of combinators in CSS. The first one is a Descendant Selector, which is a space, and the second one is a Child Selector, which is a greater sign, and the third one is Adjacent Sibling Selector, which is a plus, and the final one, which is the fourth one, is the General Sibling Selector, which is a tilde sign. So the first one that we have is the Descendant Selector, and the Descendant Selector matches all elements that are descendants of a specified element. Now let's show you an example. So let's get back to our Visual Studio Code, and in here let's first create a div, and inside the div let's create some paragraphs. So let's say paragraph 1, and let's duplicate it, so this one will be 2, and let's also create a section and it will also hold a paragraph, so let's say paragraph 3, and let's also create some paragraphs outside the div to show you this example more clearly. So this one will be paragraph, let's say 3 or 4, and let's create another one which will be 5. Now let's go to our style stack, and in here let's target the paragraphs inside the div. So we can do that using the Descendants Selector. So let's say div and then space p. So it will target only the paragraphs that is inside the div. So let's press enter, and let's say background color, and let's make it yellow. So if I save this now and refresh the browser, so you can see the paragraphs that are only inside the div are getting the background color, and the two paragraphs that are outside the div are not getting anything in style. Now next up what we have is the Child Selector, which we can declare with the greater sign, and the Child Selector selects all elements that are the children of a specified element. So to show you an example, let's get back to our Visual Studio Code. So we will use the same code, but this time instead of space we can declare a greater sign like this, and now the descendants for the div will get the background color same as before. So if we get back to the browser and refresh, so you can see because these two paragraphs are the children of the div, but this third paragraph, if I show you the code, is the child of this section. So that is the reason it's not getting the background color, but these two other paragraphs, which are children of the div, are getting the background color. Now next up what we have is the Adjacent Sibling Selector, which is a plus sign, and Adjacent Sibling Selector is used to select an element that is directly after another specific element. Now sibling elements must have the same parent element, and adjacent means immediately following. So to show you some examples, in here what we can do is after these paragraphs let's copy this div and let's paste it here, and let's make this one like 6, this one like 7, and let's say this one will be 8, and let's copy these two paragraphs which are outside the div and paste it after the second div. So for this one let's say 9, and for this one let's say 10. And now let's go to our style stack. So in here instead of greater sign, now let's say div plus p. So before I tell you what this will does, let's get back to the browser and let's refresh. So now you can see the paragraph 4 and the paragraph 9 is getting the background color. And to show you the code, in here you can see this is the paragraph 4 and this is the paragraph 9. So you can see that these two paragraphs comes after the div. So now you can clearly see the code that this div plus p means that the div or the paragraph after the div will get the styling. So this paragraph comes after the div, and this one is also after the div. So div plus p or paragraph means that the paragraphs after the div will get the background color of yellow. Now finally what we have is the general sibling selector, which can be declared using a tilde sign. So general sibling selector selects all elements that are next siblings of a specified element. So to show you an example, so now in here what we can do is, instead of a plus sign, let's declare a tilde sign. And now what this will do is, because after the div we have these two paragraphs, so it will get the background color. So what we can do is we can remove, for example, this second paragraph, and instead of this paragraph in here, if we declare something else, like let's say a span tag, so let's say some text in here. So because these four paragraphs comes after the div, these all will get the background color of yellow. So to show you the browser, let's refresh. So you can see the four paragraphs are getting the background color because they are all after the div. So this was all about the CSS combinators that you can use to style elements. So next up what we have is the CSS pseudo classes. So what are pseudo classes? Well, a pseudo class is used to define a special state of an element. For example, it can be used to style an element when a user mouses over it, or to style visited and unvisited links differently, or style an element when it gets focused. So to show you some examples, let's get back to Visual Studio Code. Now what we can do is we can remove all of this code, and let's also remove the stylings like this. So suppose we have anchor pseudo classes. Now links can be displayed in different ways. So to show you some examples, let's first create an anchor tag. So in here what I will do is I will create an anchor tag. So for the href, let's say hash, and let's target this one to a blank page, and let's also design it in our styles tag. So for the text of the anchor tag, let's say this is a link like this. And now in our styles tag, what we can do is we can use anchor tag pseudo classes. So an anchor tag has a pseudo class of link itself. So to use it, we can say a colon link and curly braces, and let's declare the color for this one red. And next up, for the anchor tag, we have the visited pseudo class. So let's say a colon visited, which is this one, and let's say curly braces, and let's say color should be green. And next up what we have is the hover pseudo class. So let's say a colon hover, and for this one let's declare a color. So let's say hot pink. And finally we have the active pseudo class. So let's say a colon active, which is this one. Now let's say curly braces, and for this one let's say color should be blue. So if we get back to the browser now and refresh, now you can see this link is green, and that is because this link is visited. So if we change the href to something else, now you can see it is a link itself, which is red, and when we hover over it, you can see it changes to hot pink. So if we click on it, you can see the click one is blue. So let's close all of these. Now note that a hover pseudo class must always come after the link and a visited pseudo class. In order to be effective, the active must come after hover in the CSS definition in order to be effective. Now pseudo class names are not case sensitive, so keep this in mind. Now next up what we have is pseudo classes and HTML classes. So pseudo classes can be combined with HTML classes. So to show you an example, let's get back to Visual Studio Code. What we can do is remove all of this styling from here, and let's remove the anchor tag also. So let's create a paragraph, and inside the paragraph let's declare some text. So let's say CSS pseudo classes. So let's say pseudo classes. And for this paragraph, what I will do is I will declare a class, or instead of paragraph, guys, let's create an anchor tag also. So we will put the text inside the anchor tag. Now let's declare a class for the anchor tag. So let's say it should be highlight, and for the href, let's put a hash. And now what we can do is we can target this class and combine it with a pseudo class. So we can do that using a.highlight like this, and then colon, and let's declare a hover pseudo class, and let's declare some color for it. So hash ff0000, and let's say font size. So let's say font size 22px. If I save this, get back to the browser, and let's check it out. So if I hover over it, you can see now it is getting the hover pseudo class effects. So we can hover over divs also. So if I show you this one, let's get back to Visual Studio Code, and now instead of this paragraph, let's create a div like this, and let's say mouse over me. So instead of highlight, what we can do is we can declare the div. So let's say, well, let's first declare some styling for the div itself. So instead of all of this styling, well, let's say for example background color should be green, and let's say color should be white, and let's say some padding should be 25px, and let's say text align center. And now let's declare hover pseudo class to this div. So we can say div colon hover, and for this one let's say background color should be blue. So if I save this, get back to the browser, refresh, and now if I mouse over it, you can see it is changing the color or background color to blue. Now we can create or implement a simple tooltip also using the hover pseudo class. So to show you an example of this one, let's get back to Visual Studio Code. What we can do is, instead of this text inside the div, let's say for example hover over this div element to show the p element like this. So let's declare the p element now inside the div. So let's say paragraph, and let's say here I am like this. Now in our styles, let's remove this, and first of all let's declare some styling for the paragraph. So let's say display should be none, and next up let's declare a background color for it. Well, this should be color, so let's say for example yellow, and let's say we want to give it some padding of 20px. So now what we can do is we can declare a pseudo class for the div and style the paragraph. So we can do that using div colon hover, and then we want to style the paragraph. So we want to display it block. So let's say display block. So by default we are displaying the paragraph none, and whenever we hover over the div, we want the paragraph to be in block. So if I get back to the browser now, refresh, and now you can see when I hover over the div, it is showing the paragraph. Now next up what we have is the first child pseudo class. So this pseudo class matches a specified element that is the first child of another element. So to show you an example, let's get back to Visual Studio Code. So for this one, what we can do is let's remove all of this code from inside the div, and let's create a paragraph here, and let's just say this is some text, and let's duplicate it, and let's declare some paragraphs outside the div. So let's say paragraph, this is some text, and let's duplicate it. So now what we can do is we can remove these stylings from here, and let's say p colon first, and then hyphen child, and let's say curly braces, and let's say color should be blue. So now if we save this and get back to the browser, refresh, now you can see the first child of every element is getting the blue color, and of course the child, which is the paragraph. So if I show you the code, well, this first paragraph is the child of the body, so for that reason it is getting the blue color. and this other paragraph, which is the first child of this div, is also getting the blue color. So to show you some more examples, let's remove all of this code from here, and let's create another paragraph, and let's say let's create an I tag, and in here let's say strong, and outside the I tag let's say person, and let's say another I tag, and let's say strong, and in here let's say person, and let's duplicate it. And now what we can do is, in our styles tag, let's say p space I colon first child, and then curly braces, and let's say color should be blue. So if we get back to the browser now and refresh, now you can see the first child or the first I tag is getting the blue color. So if we check out the code, well, this first I tag is the first child of this paragraph, so for that reason it is getting the color blue, and the other one is also the same. So to show you some more examples, so let's duplicate these two paragraphs, and this time what I will do is, instead of coding like this or styling like this, let's declare the p colon first child, and on the paragraph first child we want to declare some styling for the I. So this time what this will do is, for the first paragraph it will style both I tags, and in here it will also, well, for this one let's declare a div also to give it some parent element like this. So in here this first paragraph, which is the child of body, and this other first paragraph, which is the child of this div, and the I tags inside these two will get the styling. So if I show you the browser, let's refresh, you can see this is the first paragraph, which is the child of the body, so both I tags are getting the styling, and this other paragraph, which is the first child of the div, and it has two I tags, and they are getting the color styling. Now finally, regarding the pseudo class, what we have is the lang pseudo class, which allows you to define special rules for different languages. So to show you an example of this one, let's get back to Visual Studio Code, and in here what I will do is I will remove this div. So let's remove it, and for the first paragraph let's remove the text, so like this, and let's say some text, and let's declare a q tag, and for this one we want to declare a lang, so it will be no, for example, and let's say a quote in a paragraph, and after the q tag let's say some text like this. So we can remove the second paragraph also, and now what we can do is, inside the style tag let's say q and then colon lang, and then we want to target the no. So for this one we want to say curly braces, and let's say quotes should be let's say a quotation, and we want a tilde, and after it we also want a tilde like this. So if I save this and get back to the browser and refresh, now you can see this code is getting these two quotation marks. Now this was all for pseudo classes, and next up what we have is the CSS Studio Elements. So what are pseudo elements? Now CSS Studio Element is used to style specified parts of an element. For example, it can be used to style the first letter or line of an element, or insert content before or after the content of an element. So to show you some examples, let's get back to Visual Studio Code, and let's remove this paragraph, and let's remove the stylings also. And in here, so for example, let's create a paragraph, and now what we can do is let's get back to our styles tag, and in here we have the first line pseudo element, so we can target the paragraph, and then let's say colon first line and curly braces, and now we can give it some styling. So let's say color hash ff0000. Now let's also declare some font variant, so let's say small caps. So if I refresh the browser now Now you can see the first line is getting the styling. Now note that the first line pseudo element can only be applied to block level elements, and the properties that can be applied to first line is font properties, color properties, background properties, word spacing, letter spacing, text decoration, vertical align, text transform, line height, and clear. So these are the properties that you can use with the first line pseudo element. Now what if you declare a single colon instead of double colon? Well, double colon is replaced with the single colon notation for pseudo elements in CSS3, and this was an attempt from W3C to distinguish between pseudo classes and pseudo elements. Now the single colon syntax was used for both pseudo classes and pseudo elements in CSS2 and CSS1. So for backward compatibility, the single colon syntax is acceptable for CSS2 and CSS1 pseudo elements. Now next up, what we have is the first letter pseudo element, and it is used to add a special style to the first letter of a text. So to show you an example of this one, let's get back to Visual Studio Code. So this time, instead of first line, let's say first letter, and for the styling, well, the color is alright, but instead of font variant, let's say font size, and let's say XX hyphen large. So if I save this and refresh the browser, now you can see only the first letter of the paragraph is getting the styling. Now the first letter pseudo element is also like the first line pseudo element, and it can be only applied to block level elements. And the properties that it can take is the font properties, color properties, background properties, margin properties, padding properties, border properties, text decoration, vertical align, text transform, line height, float, and clear. So these are all the properties that the first letter pseudo element can take. Now next up, what we have is the pseudo elements and HTML classes. So we can combine pseudo elements with HTML classes. And to show you some examples, let's get back to Visual Studio Code, and in here, instead of all of this paragraph, let's remove for example this part, and let's declare another paragraph like this, and let's put some lorem ipsum here like this. So for the first paragraph, let's declare a class, and let's say intro. So this will be intro. And now what we can do is, in our style stack, let's remove the styling, and let's say p.intro, and then we want to use a pseudo element, so colon colon first, and then let's say letter, so curly braces, and now let's declare a color for it, so hash ff0000, and let's say font size, so font size, and let's say 200%. And if I save this, get back to the browser, refresh, now you can see the first paragraph and the first letter of the first paragraph is getting only the styling. Now this is how you can use or combine pseudo elements with HTML classes. Now next up, what we have is multiple pseudo elements. So several pseudo elements can also be combined. So to show you an example, let's get back to Visual Studio Code. Now what we can do is, let's remove this first paragraph, and for the second one we will use some pseudo elements. So let's remove this styling, and let's say p colon first letter, so like this, and let's say curly braces, and let's say color, so hash ff0000, and let's say font size, so font size, and let's say xx hyphen large, and after this styling, let's say p colon colon first line, so like this, and then curly braces, and let's say color should be hash, and then let's say 0000ff, and after this let's say font variant, and let's say small caps. So if I save this and refresh the browser, now you can see we can combine several pseudo elements also. Now next up, what we have is the before pseudo element. So it can be used to insert some content before the content of an element. So to show you an example of this one, let's get back to Visual Studio Code. So to show you an example of this one, what we can do is let's remove this paragraph, or we can leave it but make it a little bit shorter, so like this. And let's create a h1, and let's say this is a heading, and after the paragraph let's create another h1, so this will be also a heading. So now let's return to our stylings, and in here let's declare some styling for the h1. So let's say h1, and let's say colon colon before. So this is a pseudo element, and we want to add some content before the h1 content. So in here let's say content, and now we can declare a URL for it. So I have an image and I want to put it before the content of the h1. So its name is smiley. Let's say smiley.gif. So if I save this now and get back to the browser, refresh, so for some reason it's not showing the image, and I think it's the URL. So if we check out our project, you can see we have this images folder. So we have to first go to the images like this, and then we have the smiley.gif. So if I refresh the browser now you can see we have this smiley before the content of the heading. Now next up, what we have is the after pseudo element. So it can be used to insert some content after the content of an element. So to show you an example of this one, let's get back to our Visual Studio Code, and this time instead of before we can use the after pseudo element. So we want to insert the same smiley after the content of the headers. So if I refresh the browser now you can see the smiley has moved to after the content of the headings. Now next up, what we have is the marker pseudo element. So it can be used to select the markers of list items. So to show you an example of this one, let's get back to our Visual Studio Code, and in here what I will do is I will create some lists. So let's say first of all a UL, and for this one we have some LIs. So let's say example, and let's duplicate it a couple of times, and next let's create another OL, and let's say LI. So let's say for example first, and this one will be second, and this one will be third. So now in our style stack, what we can do is we can style the markers of these lists. So let's say colon colon marker like this, and curly braces, and let's say color should be red, and let's say font size, and we want it to be 23 pixels. So if I save this, get back to the browser now, refresh, now you can see the markers of the lists are getting the styling. Now next up, what we have is the selection pseudo element. So this element matches the portion of an element that is selected by a user. Now the properties that can be applied to this element is the color, background, cursor, and outline properties. So to show you an example of this one, let's get back to Visual Studio Code. What we can do is let's remove these lists from here, and let's create an h1. So let's say select some text on this page, and after this let's create a paragraph. Let's say this is a paragraph, and after this let's create a div, and let's say this is some text in a div element. Now let's style it. So now we can use the selection pseudo element. So let's say colon colon selection, and then curly braces, and let's say color should be red, and let's say background should be yellow. And if I save this now, get back to the browser, refresh, well now let's try to select this. So you can see we are selecting it, and it is getting the red color and yellow background color. So if we select this one, it is also like that, and this one is also getting the styling. So guys, this was everything about CSS Studio Elements. Now this being done, this was all for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching the video, and if so, don't forget to give the thumbs up and a nice comment also. And if you are new to this channel, don't forget to subscribe too if you want more videos like this. So thanks for watching. See ya in the next video.